They came to us on their knees. I had never seen a species that old look so small. The Velhari elder sat across the table from me in the Concordat Emergency Council chamber. His 4 silver eyes lowered, his long pale hands folded together on the table like a man preparing to confess something shameful. He had lived for over 3,000 years. His civilization had mapped star systems before our ancestors had learned to write, and yet here he was, speaking to me, a human woman from a small blue planet that had only joined the Galactic Concordat 11 years ago, asking for help. "Commander Osei," he said, his voice quiet and careful, "we are running out of time." I already knew. Everyone in that room knew. The Keth swarm had been tearing through Concordat space for over a decade. 12 colony worlds were gone. Hundreds of billions of lives, erased. The Velhari, the Dren, the Sohari, species with histories stretching back tens of thousands of years, had thrown everything they had at the swarm, and it had not been enough. The Keth did not negotiate. They did not retreat. They consumed, and they moved forward, and they consumed again. Now they were weeks away from Ashavan, the last great Velhari fortress world. If it fell, there was nothing left between the swarm and the heart of the Concordat. I kept my face very still while the elder spoke. I had practiced that over many years. Diplomacy, they had taught me, was mostly the art of not letting people see what you were thinking. What I was thinking was this: they should have asked us sooner. I told the council that Earth would respond. I did not tell them what that response would look like. Partly because it was not my place to say. Partly because I was not sure they were ready to hear it. The Concordat knew that humans were warlike. It was one of the first things noted in our species profile when we were admitted to membership. The older species had been politely horrified by our history, the long centuries of conflict, the weapons we had built, the sheer creativity we had shown in finding ways to defeat each other. They had admitted us anyway, mostly because our planet sat at a useful junction in a trade corridor, and because we had shown enough diplomatic sense to apply rather than simply expand. They thought our violent history was a flaw we were slowly growing out of. They were wrong about that. What they had never taken the time to understand was the difference between a species that fights because it is frightened and a species that fights because it is built for it. Every creature in the Concordat had, at some point in its evolutionary past, been prey. They had all learned fear as a survival tool. Fear made them careful. Fear made them build walls and defensive lines and treaties designed to keep dangerous things at a distance. Humans had not evolved as prey. We came from a world that wanted to remove us from existence from the very first day. The heat, the cold, the storms, the predators, the diseases. Earth had tried to end us in 1,000 ways, and we had survived every single attempt. Not by hiding, not by running. We had survived by becoming the most dangerous thing on the planet, and then by making sure we stayed that way. Our military did not exist to deter conflict. It existed to win it, completely, and our long history had given us centuries of practice in figuring out exactly how to do that. When I told the council that Earth was sending ships, the Velhari elder nodded with visible relief. He pictured, I imagine, something like what the Concordat called a war fleet, orderly lines of defensive carriers, support vessels, diplomatic escorts. What arrived 3 weeks later was something else. I was standing on the observation deck of the council station when they came out of faster-than-light travel. 47 ships. Not the largest fleet ever assembled, but I had seen the specifications, and size was not the point. Each vessel was designated under a classification the Concordat translation system had flagged as unusual. The translators had asked twice if the term was being used as a figure of speech. It was not. A young Velhari officer standing beside me looked at the incoming formation on the display and frowned. "Their approach pattern," he said slowly. "They are not forming a defensive perimeter." "No," I said. "They are moving toward the projected Keth entry vector." "Yes." He looked at me. "They are moving toward where the swarm will arrive." "That is correct." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" I thought about how to explain it simply. "Because the best place to stop something," I said, "is before it gets where it is going." He did not look reassured by this. Several of the other observers in the room had gone very still, watching the human fleet settle into a position that every Concordat military doctrine said was tactically indefensible. They were not wrong, by their own logic. Concordat doctrine was built around minimizing losses. Pull back, fortify, hold. It was sensible. It was the strategy of people who understood that every soldier lost was irreplaceable. It was also, I had come to believe, why the Keth had been winning for 11 years. The swarm arrived 6 days later. I watched the battle from the council chamber, along with every senior member of the Concordat who could reach the station in time. The feed was live, without editing. What we saw over the next 4 hours would be discussed in Concordat diplomatic circles for a generation. The Keth came in their standard formation, a vast, spreading wave designed to overwhelm defensive lines through sheer numbers and relentless forward pressure. It had worked against every Concordat force they had ever faced. The swarm did not need to be clever. It only needed to be enormous and unstoppable, and it was both. The human fleet did not form a defensive line. It drove directly into the wave. 47 ships accelerating into the leading edge of a force 10 times their number. I heard someone behind me make a sound that I think was meant to be a word but did not quite manage it. On the display, the formations collided, and for a few seconds the tactical overlay became almost impossible to read. Too much movement, too much signal noise. Then the picture became clearer. The Keth's forward units were dissolving, not being pushed back, dissolving. The human ships were not trying to hold a line or protect a position. They were cutting through, separating Keth units from each other, isolating clusters, dismantling the swarm's coordination piece by piece. Where Concordat fleets had always fought to survive, the human fleet was fighting to destroy. The difference in approach was so fundamental that for several minutes the Keth seemed not to know how to respond to it. No one had ever charged them before. Then the boarding signals appeared on the display. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the Velhari admiral standing to my left, a decorated veteran who had fought the Keth for 30 years. "They are boarding the Keth vessels," he said, as if saying it aloud might make it make more sense. "Yes," I said, voluntarily. "Yes." He stared at the display. "My people have fought the Keth for 11 years, he said quietly. "We have never once considered boarding them. The environments inside their ships are—" He stopped. "They are not survivable for most species." "Most species," I agreed. He turned to look at me then, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize the ground beneath you is not quite what you thought it was. The Keth had a weapon they used against Concordat species in close quarters engagement, a chemical compound released into the air that triggered deep, immediate fear responses in almost every known biology. It was extraordinarily effective. Concordat soldiers exposed to it were rendered unable to fight within seconds. The human Marines moved through it and kept going. Later, in the medical reports, the effect on human biology was described as moderate discomfort and elevated alertness. Our threat responses, shaped by millions of years on a planet that was actively trying to end us, did not process danger the way other species did. Fear, for us, was not a stop signal. It was an accelerator. The Keth adapted, as they always did. The swarm was not mindless. It was vast and ancient and deeply experienced in breaking the will of enemy forces. Over the following weeks, as the human fleet pressed the campaign, the Keth tried everything that had worked against Concordat species. They broadcast images of destroyed worlds on all frequencies, a psychological tactic designed to make defending forces feel hopeless. There was a 4-second silence on the human command channel. Then the fleet commander's voice came through, flat and steady. "They are showing us what they did to people who could not fight back. Update all target priorities." This just became personal. The Concordat observers in the room looked at each other. The Velhari admiral sat down slowly in his chair. "They became angry," he said, almost to himself. An older Dren council member nearby turned to him. "Is that useful in combat?" The admiral was quiet for a moment. "I have never seen it before," he said. "I did not know it was possible to fight angry. Anger makes you imprecise." I shook my head gently. "Not for us," I said. "For us, anger is clarifying. It reminds us exactly what we are fighting for." The Dren council member studied me for a long moment. I could see him recalibrating something in his mind. "Your species has spent a great deal of time being angry," he said carefully. "We have had reasons to be," I said. "It made us very good at this." 6 weeks after the first human ships arrived, something happened that no one in the Concordat had ever seen in 11 years of fighting the Keth. The swarm retreated. Not a tactical withdrawal, a genuine retreat, pulling back from Ashavan and from the surrounding systems, contracting toward its own space. He turned. The Concordat Military Council convened an emergency session. Most of the senior commanders wanted to hold position, secure the recovered systems, and consider the retreat a victory. The human fleet did not hold position. It followed. I was summoned to the council chamber within an hour. The Velhari elder was standing when I arrived, which was unusual. His species sat for formal proceedings. He looked at me with an expression I could not fully read. "Commander Osei," he said, "your fleet is pursuing the swarm into unclaimed space." "Yes," I said. "This goes against 11 separate Concordat resolutions on engagement boundaries." "I am aware." There are conventions. Elder. I kept my voice respectful. I had a great deal of genuine respect for him. I understand the concern. But I need you to think carefully about what a ceasefire buys you here. The Keth are not retreating because they have changed. They are retreating because they have encountered something they did not expect. If we stop now, they will adapt. They will come back. They always come back. He was quiet. Around the table, other council members watched in silence. What you are proposing, said a Sohari representative slowly, is not a ceasefire. You are proposing to end the Keth swarm permanently. Yes, I said. The room was very still. That is, the Sohari representative began. That is not, there are conventions about the total elimination of. They do not follow those conventions, I said. I let that sit for a moment. They never offered them to the 12 worlds they destroyed. They did not offer them to the billions of people who are gone. The conventions you are describing exist to prevent unnecessary harm. The Keth do not cause unnecessary harm. They cause all possible harm, to everyone, without exception, until there is no one left. I looked at the elder. You came to us because you needed to be saved. We are saving you. Please let us finish. The final campaign took 4 more weeks. I will not describe all of it. Some of it is not mine to tell, and some of it I think would be difficult for people who were not there to properly understand. What I will say is this. It worked. The Keth swarm, which had devastated the Concordat for 11 years, was gone, not pushed back, not suppressed, dismantled so completely that what remained, scattered, disconnected, unable to coordinate, would take centuries to rebuild into anything that could threaten anyone. The Concordat celebrated. There were broadcasts across hundreds of worlds. Species that had been living under the shadow of the swarm for a decade woke up to the news that it was over, and the celebrations were enormous and genuine and deeply moving to watch. And then, quietly, the Concordat began to think about what they had invited in. I saw it in the small moments, the way conversations shifted when I entered rooms, the careful new politeness from council members who had previously been casually dismissive. A dozen species quietly updating their diplomatic assessments of humanity, recalibrating how they spoke to our representatives, rethinking assumptions they had held since the day we were admitted. The Velhari elder sent a formal message of gratitude. It was beautifully written and clearly sincere, and underneath the words there was something else. Not quite an apology, but the closest thing to one that his culture's traditions allowed. I read it twice. I thought about what we were to each other now, all of us in this Concordat, and what we were going to need to figure out. A young Velhari diplomat found me in a corridor 3 days after the final battle reports came in. She was barely 2 centuries old, a child, by her people's standards. She had the look of someone who had been working up to saying something for a while. Commander Osei, she said, may I ask you something directly? Please. She took a breath. Are humans dangerous to us? I stood with that question for a moment. It was the right question. It was the one everyone was thinking, and no one else had been willing to ask to my face. Every species with real strength is dangerous, I said. That is what strength means. But you are asking something more specific, and you deserve a specific answer. She waited. We do not turn on the people we protect, I said. That is not who we are. You asked for our help and we came, without hesitation, and we fought, and we finished it, and not once did we ask what we would receive in return. That is how we work. Loyalty runs very deep in us, perhaps deeper than is entirely rational. I paused. But yes, we are dangerous. I want you to know that clearly. Not because I want you to fear us. I do not. I want you to understand us. The universe you live in contains things that are ancient and powerful and completely without mercy. And you need someone in your community who can face those things and not break. That is what we are. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, and I saw something in her expression that was not quite fear and not quite awe, but somewhere between the two. I watched her walk away down the corridor. Behind me, through the station's observation window, I could see the human fleet running maintenance cycles, the ships quiet and dark against the stars, and inside them I knew the soldiers were doing what soldiers always do after a fight, eating, arguing, laughing, telling stories about what happened, already thinking about what comes next. They were ready. They were always ready. That was the thing about my people that no chart or diplomatic profile would ever quite capture. We did not wait for peace to find us. We built it with the only tools we had ever fully trusted. And when something tried to take it away, from us or from anyone who had asked us to stand with them, we made sure it did not get the chance to try again.